Hi and welcome. I'm preparing to head down to my wormery, but before doing so, I thought I'd check in on my tracking spreadsheet just to make sure I'm on top of what I want to take care of today. I've penciled in a few days worth of work in advance over here, and it's trying to take into account how much I had fed previously. So, for example, over here, when it comes to feeding these African nightcrawler containers, I had mapped out Monday, which is still 5 days from now. And the last feeding they received was 5 days ago. I thought that at least 10 days should pass since their last feeding, because it was a fairly abundant feeding. Usually I'll feed in about a weekly basis, 6 to 8 days. But here I thought I would give those bins a couple extra days before feeding them again, just because there did seem to be a lot of food added to those. I also thought that I had added a lot of food to my red wiggler bins too, but when I reviewed the video, it did seem like I was maybe not quite as generous as I had originally thought. So it does seem like today, after 7 days, that they're due for another feeding. So I penciled in a feeding for the red wigglers today. African nightcrawlers will get fed again next on Monday, 5 days from now, giving them a little bit more time. And then over here I've got my European nightcrawlers penciled in for another feeding. I guess that'll be 8 days. It was a couple days ago that I last fed them. And then I've still got to figure out what to do with my newest container, which is kind of a mixed bag. That container's got red wigglers, European nightcrawlers, blues. It's the newest of my bins, and it's only 5 days old. And it got a pretty good, abundant amount of food added to it when I originally built the bin. And since it was only populated 5 days ago, I thought, I might let that one ride a little bit before feeding it. So I'll try to figure out when to fit that in at some point. So we'll see where things go with that one. But yeah, what's on the game plan for today is feeding the red wigglers. Besides feeding these two containers, I'm also going to check in on this one that was last fed 14 days ago, which is in a foraging mode, just to see how they're coming along with what's in that bin, and to see if we're getting any closer to that point where we might be able to sort of take them out of foraging mode and start initiating the migration of the worms out of that material, because that one's already at the age of 110 days old, almost 16 weeks of age at this point. So let's head on downstairs now. I've already taken the used coffee, the frozen food, everything that they're going to be getting is down there already on the bench. All we got to do is shoot down there and get to work. So what they're getting today is a nice assortment of cantaloupe rinds. I snapped a frozen banana in half, so they each get a half of a banana, and some strawberry. And along with that is going to be the staple food item that they almost always get, which is the used coffee right here in this carton box. So let's get the first bin up here on the bench and let's check it out. We're not going to feed the first one. I think we're going to check the foraging bin first, see how things are coming along in there, and then we'll proceed to feeding the other two bins that are on the docket for today. All right, let's get to work. Okay, so now here's where we've got that bin that I referred to as being in that foraging stage, where the worms haven't been fed for about 14 days now. And the aim is to get them to try to break down any sort of scraps of bedding and food that still linger within the material. And there's still quite a bit of that, or at least there was last time we checked in here a week ago. I just figured since these are red wigglers and since we're feeding red wigglers, I'll just check in on this red wiggler foraging bin at the same time that I'm feeding the red wigglers. So there's been a lot of leaves that we've been encountering in these bins lately, because I had at one point when it was like, a lot of beautiful autumn leaves of different colors on the ground, I thought it would be kind of nifty to, bring some of those leaves inside and include them in my bins to, make a little splash of color. And those colors have long faded at this point. So those leaves are now just scattered about, just being used as bedding. And my hope is that in time they'll eventually start breaking them down, and that the worms will treat those leaves more as food rather than bedding. One thing I did do last time we were in here a week ago was that every time I encountered one of those leaves, I kind of stacked it up over in the corner like I'm doing now, so as to sort of collect them up and before I restored the bin and covered it back up to let it continue, I had placed all of that down into the middle of the bin, sort of to treat it almost as like a feeding in a way, to sort of concentrate all that leafy material into a single spot so that we can more easily see how it's coming along the next time we check in here. I figured before we start probing around within the material, I'll try to fetch some of that material really quick. So now we're starting to come up on some of the leafy material that had been set aside and then all placed down the middle last time. It kind of makes me assume that that's kind of where we're going to find the majority of the worms hanging out. It's amazing. 2 weeks later, I'm still seeing stuff in here that's clearly the last feeding, which is potato. And I thought that that potato would be very easy for them to eat because I had taken the extra time to try steaming all of that potato to make it soft and very easy for the worms to break down. But it doesn't seem to make too big of a difference if it's still here, I guess. That was kind of a little bit of a mishap-ridden attempt. I got sidetracked and then I ended up leaving the steamed vegetables on the stove for too long. So when I finally went back up to the kitchen, I had a little bit of a charred mess on my hands. Alright, so I'm just going to start probing around at this point just to see how things look in general, and as I encounter these leaves, I'm going to fish them out. I was even thinking at this point that since so much of this material is also the thick stems of the leaves, I might actually just go ahead and remove a lot of this stuff and move it to a different, younger bin where there'd be a lot more time for the stuff to break down gradually. And I'm wondering if we should just do that today. The newest of my bins, which we'll feed at the end, this is the oldest of the red wigglers. When we get to the newest, which is still fairly young, I think if we were to throw all this stuff into that bin, then there'd be plenty of time for it to break down. And I wouldn't feel like it's going to become an impedance to slow us down in this bin. I might do just that. Since we're collecting it all together, maybe we'll just pull it all out at the same time. And then that should help the worms be able to break down the remainder of the stuff that's in here a little bit more quickly, rather than being sidetracked by all this other slow composting material. Although, I don't know, I usually wouldn't consider leaves as a slow composting type of an item. But maybe this stuff just wasn't quite, old enough, or wasn't just wasn't shredded up and broken down quite enough, or whatever the case may be. It's sticking around a lot longer than I thought it would. So yeah, I kind of like that idea, I think this material would benefit from having a lot of that large, chunky stuff removed out of it. And then we could just go ahead and include it as bedding when we get around to feeding the newest of the bins. Because that newest red wiggler bin is very, very heavily populated. So even though I kind of laid out the food in equal portions here, I'm now reminded of the fact that that second bin that we're going to be feeding is probably got, who knows, maybe twice as many worms in it as the first one that we're going to be feeding. That bin is kind of exciting to check in on and to feed, just because of the sheer number of worms that hang out in that bin. So it makes sense to, go ahead and give them a little extra stuff to work on. And this stuff right here would actually be a really good thing for them to get. And then knowing that it's a somewhat newer bin as well, it would also give it time enough to hopefully get broken down by the time that that bin is getting close to the point where we might be able to consider harvesting it, if we pull out a lot of this large chunk material. And I think we'll see the progress of this bin proceed a lot more nicely than if it didn't have all this stuff in here. The moisture level in here is pretty decent. I've been keeping the plastic coverings on. I'm trying to preserve whatever moisture there is in here, and it's doing a good job. The material seems nice and cozy and comfortable, and the worms do seem to be enjoying pretty much all sections of the bin, even out on the edges where it would normally dry out a little bit more, because that's where the bin gets a little bit more air, a little bit more ventilation around the plastic that's covering things up. Although these sheets of plastic that I've been using lately are pretty good sized, and they do reach right out to the edges of the bin. So I think I've just been getting a lot better coverage using these new plastic bags that I just started using recently. I'm really pleased with the way they've been working. This is quite a big pile of stuff that's coming together here, I've got to say. So I think on this side of the bin we're in pretty good shape so far. I'm wondering if we're going to be able to collect an equal amount of stuff out of the other side. So we've already got quite a good pile of material here. All right, let's fish around just a little bit more and see what we can come up with. And then we'll move on to feeding. I think this probably helps a lot too, just in terms of sort of injecting a little dose of air down into the material within the bin. So all the microscopic life that lives within the bin benefits a lot from having a good steady airflow. It's all the microscopic life, bacteria, fungi, everything else in the bin that's actually doing the majority of the work. The worms just come along and slurp up the byproduct of their hard work. So you also want to take into account the needs of the microscopic life within your bin to make sure that it's getting all the materials that it needs to be healthy and productive. And I believe that a good supply of air is one of the important things for that sort of material in the bin. I think we did spend a little bit more time in this bin than I had originally planned. It was really just going to be a check-in, but kind of turned into a little bit of a sort of an extraction effort. And we ended up with a good amount of stuff over here, that's for sure. Yeah, I like the way this looks. And I got a feeling by removing all of this stuff out of here, mainly these sticks, I think we're going to see progress pick up a little bit better than if we had just left it all in here. We'd be waiting forever and ever. So that was kind of fun. It's always kind of interesting rummaging around within the bin and seeing how things look throughout. But I'm going to go grab a tray that we can dump all this material in. And we'll set it aside and we'll include it in the feeding of the last bin that we're going to take care of when we're feeding. All this stuff is pretty sticky. There's plenty of moisture in here. But I think we will keep the plastic on just to make sure that the entire environment stays nice and damp and cozy so that the worms can continue to do their work. So yeah, let's get something we can put all this stuff into. This tray is pretty good size. I think we should be able to fit it all in here pretty easily. It's quite a bit. There's a couple worms in it here and there, but it does seem like for the most part we pulled out only uneaten leaves. Maybe some castings that were stuck to them also. It's quite a bit of stuff. But I think it'll be much better off over in the newest of my red wiggler bins. We're gonna get everything covered back up here nicely. And let this 110-day-old red wiggler bin continue with its foraging. So now on day 14 we've actually excluded a good bit of the material that we think is going to hold us back from getting to the finish. So we'll probably check in on this next time again, maybe a week from now or so, when we're feeding the red wigglers again, to see how they're coming along. Let's proceed to feeding the red wigglers. All this material out on the top, all this paper, it's been out here for a couple weeks now, I believe. And it seems like it's getting broken down pretty nicely. At least it's definitely seeing a good amount of worm traffic with all the castings scattered all around it. So the worms are coming up to enjoy the moisture near the top, hanging out within it. I don't know, maybe they're just taking advantage of the moisture. Maybe they're not even eating the paper yet. In time they will, though. So we'll continue to try to use this paper the same way as we have been, sort of just covering up the top and giving them a place to hang out in. Good amount of surface area to hang out on. And they'll continue depositing their castings on it. You can see in here too, we've got a good amount of this same leafy material that was used in a number of my bins. But since we've got a little bit more time left in this bin, we're not going to worry about extracting anything from here. We're just going to give it time to get done. Things in this bin seem a little bit more damp. Very muddy-ish, if that's a word. Can something be muddy-ish? Kind of makes me wonder if it might be beneficial to maybe leave the plastic off this particular bin, maybe just for a week or so, just to give it time to air out a bit. So if you think about it, the cantaloupe melon that they're getting today, those bananas, the strawberry, everything that they're getting has got a good amount of moisture content to it. So between getting some extra moisture and already having a good bit of moisture in the bin, it might benefit this bin to start getting ventilated out a little bit so that it can dry off a little. So I'm starting to see, different materials in here. I'm not even sure what this is. Oh, this is a banana peel. It's right alongside what appears to be piece of coffee filter. I just saw these two larger bits of something right next to each other. So we're starting to see signs of some leftovers here. Here too, this is the stem of a banana peel. I'm getting pretty good at identifying this stuff. Here too, I believe this is banana peel, more banana peel. Kind of surprised to see so many leftovers, but some of this stuff does take time before the worms can break it down. So, this is the sort of stuff that they're probably going to focus more on. And then they'll leave that newer material that we're adding now and get back to that at a later point when it's had a better chance to break down more. I think here too we're seeing probably another banana peel. Another stem of a banana, plus a little bit of peel attached to it. There's a good amount of leftover food in here. So maybe this bin actually could have gone a little bit longer without a feeding. But today's feeding is certainly not a very generous one. It's just a few pieces of fruit, so I don't think it's a good plan to pull away and switch gears. I think we're just going to proceed as originally thought and go ahead and add what we've got here for them. Even though there is a good amount of leftover stuff, but I'm not going to worry about that. We're just going to go ahead and give this stuff to them in combination with what's in here already. I just like to sort of, assemble it and get a sense of how much of it there is sometimes. And I know I'm not getting all of it because I know there's probably a whole bunch of it still here. But yeah, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to proceed as planned and give them the food that we bought down here for them. My only thought was that I didn't really intend to add more bedding today, but it does seem like it might make good sense to do so. Just put a little bit of dry material down in here along with the feeding to help sop up some of the moisture that's in here. And then I think we will skip putting the plastic covering back on here and let this bin ventilate a little bit over the next week or so. So I've got this piece of paper towel over here. I had just laid out some eggs, some eggshells on it to dry off. But I've since put those eggshells into my little storage container that I keep them in until I get around to pulverizing them. So we'll just use this as some of the dry bedding that's going to maybe sop up a little bit of the moisture in the bin. And it'll also be a good good extra carbon source to complement the nitrogen-rich foods that they're getting today. So let's go ahead and give them what they've been allocated for today. It's a nice assortment of yummy stuff that they're going to probably enjoy. Put the banana right in the middle. And I'm going to apply grit because I've got a good amount of it right now piling up for whatever reason. So I'm going to start being a little bit more generous with the grit since it's accumulating. And then we'll start returning some of these food bits we encountered on the way down. And we did sort of cherry pick a couple of them, and there's obviously more of it right over here. So let's see what we could do to get this feeding area covered up pretty thoroughly, especially since it's fruits. I like the idea of getting the fruits pretty well covered. If it's kind of just veggies or maybe just coffee, stuff like that that doesn't really attract pests, I don't mind. But if it's stuff like banana, cantaloupe, things like that, I worry that it's just gonna draw pests, and I don't want that. Try to get it pretty nicely covered. Let's take all of this top cover paper and move it aside briefly. Let's give ourselves a quick peek at this other edge as well, and at the same time use that material to cover up with also. We've got all kinds of bedding scraps and food scraps, all kinds of stuff in this bin. Pretty good assortment of materials. I guess for 2.5 months old, it's coming along pretty nicely. It's clear to see that the worms are enjoying all areas of the bin, not just where the food and the moisture's been getting added, but even out on the outskirts of the bin. And that's mainly because the plastic covering keeps the moisture level throughout the bin pretty consistent. There's a good, nice, damp environment pretty much everywhere you go in this bin. And that enables the bin to pretty much work material down everywhere. There's no one place that the worms favor because of moisture. They enjoy, you know, hanging out in pretty much all areas of the bin. Yeah. Things look pretty good in here. Mostly because of all the leftovers we observed. I'm wondering if we might want to wait a little bit longer than just a week before the next time we apply food here again. Oops. We put a tear into our feeding zone indicator. Let's just not manhandle it any further. We'll put it back in place where it belongs. And then we'll get this thing covered up nicely. I'm questioning whether this is just a little bit too exposed, but you know what? I'm not going to sweat it. I'm just worried about some of the old food items that I might have brought up to the surface that might be out on the edges over here. I just don't want this to attract all kinds of flying insects, but I'm going to leave it just the way it is here. If I start to get the sense that there's a lot of activity over here in the next day or two, I might put another sheet of paper across the entire top of this just to give it a little bit better cover. But for now, I think that this should be good. I think it's going to allow it to emit a little bit of the moisture that's in here, help dry things off a bit, and not allow things to be so muddy. You can see how muddy it is. It really sticks to my glove. All right, we've got one more bin to feed, so let's proceed to that one. Once again, I just feel like I've taken so much time here, goofing around with my bins, playing around, and we'll see if we can maybe pick up the pace here and get this last bin fed. One thing I noticed though was what appeared to be a few little flying insects buzzing around over here, which I shooed them away. So hopefully we're not starting to see the beginning of a flying insect infestation. What in the world is going on here? It almost looks to me like these worms have made their way into the bag. Little dummies. I just hope they could find their way out. I wonder if that's just going to end up with like a bag full of dead worms. Oh brother, I'm going to turn this thing inside out. Let's see if we can get these little guys ejected off of here. Again, we're spending more time here than originally planned. Luckily, I don't think any of them have passed away. And I wonder what it is about the inside of the bag that would be attracting them. I'm trying not to make too much of a mess, but I've got castings flying all over the place. And I've still got worms within the bag. Duh. Oh, brother. So here on top of this paper, we've got a good number of worms hanging out too. Obviously, the plastic is doing the intended job of, you know, letting moisture collect. Let's see if we can get these little guys off of here. I'm not even sure how old this bin is at this point. Let's ask Siri. Hey Siri, how many days have passed since November 4th?
It was 35 days ago.
Alright, so this bin is just a little bit over a month old at this point. But it is occupied with a lot of worms. And I think I've cited the estimate a number of times, which in my spreadsheet I believe says 2,200. But I'm pretty sure that most of the people that have chimed in response to that estimate have provided feedback suggesting that there's probably a whole lot more in here than just 2,200 worms. You'll see. Once we get down into here, you'll see what I'm talking about. What we'll do is we'll apply today's feeding and all that leafy matter that we collected out of the other bin down the middle like we usually do. And then we'll put the feeding zone indicator back where it came from in the middle. But you know what, before digging around there, let's explore the outer edges of the bin a little bit first. Kind of break the routine pattern a little bit. The material out here has got a nice flaky consistency to it. It does not feel as muddy as it did in the other bins. You can see too, it falls right off the glove a lot more readily than the stuff we saw in the previous bin. And it seems like there's not quite as many worms out here on this outer edge as what we saw in the other bin either. Maybe that's because the material is not quite as damp. I'm not sure. It does seem like it's almost all castings. It's crazy. For a bin that's only a little bit over a month old, for it to almost feel like it's castings only at this point seems outrageous. But it seems like the worms are doing a hell of a job breaking the stuff in this bin down quickly. And it's a good sized tub. It's one of the wider tubs that I've got. And it's also rather deep too. And once again, we're not seeing the huge number of worms out here on the outskirts like we've seen in the other bins. Here too, a lot of broken down material, a lot of castings, all nice and flaky the way you want it. So I guess we're gonna hopefully see the massive number of worms that are in this bin when we get down to the middle where the feedings have been getting applied lately. Usually or at least most recently, I've been expecting to see more and more worms out on the outskirts of the bin, where a lot of the older food from previous feedings has been nudged out too. So maybe we've got our welcoming party hanging out down here in the middle where the food has been getting applied. Yes, that does seem to be the case. Look at them all. This is just a really heavily populated bin as far as I can tell. I mean, look at this. You reach in, pull out a handful of material, and it's heavy because it's almost all worms. There's a little bit of bedding stuck in between them here and there. Some of that shredded paper that was used to cover up the other bins that we've seen this stuff used in. Here it was used mostly just as bedding for the feeding area. So it does seem like they've still got a little bit of leftovers from previous feedings in here. But they're going to get their feeding just as originally planned. Don't worry about that. Here too, just tons and tons of worms hanging out down the middle. Sometimes it's kind of hard to predict what these little guys are going to do. They just go about their business and do whatever they want to do. So this is pretty good. I like this material. This bedding material seems to be working pretty nicely. They're just making themselves at home throughout it. We've got tons and tons of worms hanging out down here. Just wondering how do we get to the business of applying today's feeding? Make ourselves enough room to make that happen. I think what we're going to do now is that we've excavated a pretty good sized ditch here in the middle. We're going to take some of this paper type bedding material that we found along the way and drop it in down low. And then we're also going to introduce all of this reclaimed leafy material out of that other bin that we're trying to drive towards completion, the foraging bin. And then it almost seems like today's feeding is virtually nothing compared to the number of worms in here. So I've got a feeling we're not going to see many leftovers of these bits of food. I mean, like maybe this banana peel, maybe when we come back in here, maybe it'll be occupied with a whole bunch of worms hanging out on the inside of it, eating out the soft part of the banana. The banana peel typically takes a little bit longer. So like these are all banana peels. You'll typically find the banana peels sticking around for a little while. It takes them a little while to break down. But I'm pretty sure that those were probably part of last week's feeding. So after a week, you would probably still expect to see banana peels remaining in the bin, but after maybe 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, you'll find maybe only the stem at that point. I think before we try to cover things up here, we've got a couple more things we can include here. We're going to toss in some grit. Give them the last of the coffee that I bought down here. And then we'll start shoving in some of this material from the sides to cover up the feeding area. Try to make sure that the food is pretty well covered up. I think people have asked me in the comments of the previous videos in which this bin was featured if this is my favorite bin. I don't know, maybe. Any bin where you reach in and you see that many worms, it's always exciting. You do kind of look forward to the next feeding because it is fun poking around a bin that's got that many worms hanging out in it. I mean, geez, 35 days old. I mean, it just feels like there's so many castings in this bin. It's crazy. Castings everywhere. I mean, clearly the castings are mixed in with all kinds of other stuff too, but it's just such a huge number of castings everywhere, which makes complete sense, you know, considering the number of occupants of the bin. All of their, you know, poop has to go someplace, and that's what we're after here in the first place, right? I'm trying to make castings, and they're making it here in large amounts quickly, which is pretty awesome to see. Very nice. Always fun feeding this bin, I got to admit. So we're going to, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do with that plastic covering at this point. I like the idea of maybe cutting it in half so that we don't end up with worms inside of a plastic bag only to find them dead there later. But then again, I didn't really find any of them dead. Maybe I'm just getting overly concerned for no good reason. I'm just worried that they're going to get trapped in there and then they're not going to be able to find their way out. Maybe I'm just not giving them enough credit. I'm sure they wouldn't go there if it was just going to be the end of them. Maybe they're just exploring maybe I should just not worry about it. We'll see what happens a week from now, or whenever we get back in here to feed them next. My hope is that, you know, having a bag in here that they seem to be wandering into doesn't end up becoming a problem. It's the first bin I've observed that in, so we'll see what we get. All right, everyone. That was fun. I've got a few things to take care of here. I got a couple trays to clean up. My glove is a little bit dirty, but not too bad. But I'll take care of that off camera. Let me just really quickly, before I shut things off here, say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.